I wish I purchased more than I have done so far, but I get distracted with the cars, and I get distracted with cash flow problems that I go through on an annual basis. But yes, I also own, but that's maybe like 2% of my portfolio of 300 units.
Sayed, welcome to the show today.
Pleasure to have me here. I'm so excited to talk to you guys.
Yeah, you have a sizable short-term rental portfolio, and I'm always fascinated, how other people build their businesses and things of that nature. But I'm curious, Sayed, how did you get started with short-term rentals? Talk to us a little bit about what was going on in your life where you're like, oh, I want to get into short-term rentals.
Sure. So, just so you guys understand right now, so I have 300 units under management in the Airbnb space. I've been doing this for about 7 years now, and I had 100 resources in my business. A month ago, I actually downsized a little bit to keep up with my expense ratios, but that's kind of where my business is at today. But I'll take it back. 7 years ago when I started, my background is corporate finance. I went to college, graduated in finance, and then got a job, working at Allstate Insurance and forecasting and budgeting. I was there for about 6 years, and then I kind of got this bug to, find that financial freedom, get out of the rat race. I started listening to the ebook for Rich Dad Poor Dad that got me like super motivated, and I wanted to, have my money work for me. So at the same time, I got into the bigger podcast phase where I listened to almost every podcast on the way to work. I used to be on the forums, reading every single forum, and I wanted to get into this house hacking type model. So it was a year's worth of researching, and then finally I started wanting to put offers out. And after a year of putting offers, back in 2017, I finally got a property, a 4 unit building plus basement under contract, and I closed on the property. I had to live in the property, so I had to live in one of the units because I did FHA financing. And after I lived in the unit for a year is when I moved out. But now I had a unit that was furnished. So I was like, okay, what could I do with this unit? I stumbled upon Airbnb, and I launched my Airbnb business in February, which is a cold month in my market. And I ended up making rent. So I'm like, okay, it's February, it's a slow month, 28 days. I don't even get the full 30, 31 days. Let's see what happens in March. In March, spring break came along, and all of a sudden I made 2 times rent. So that's when I was like, whoa, like, what is going on? This is pretty neat. Like, I'm making 2 times rent. That's a huge cash flow. That's all the cash flow that I get from my long-term tenants from my other building. But this is just like one basement unit. And I was like, okay, let's keep on going. And then April came along, May came along, and I started making 3 times rent. And that's when I was like, whoa, this is like next level. I need to go all in on this. Like, how can I get more units? And at the same time, renewals were up in my building, and some tenants wanted to get a home. They moved out for whatever reasons. One tenant didn't like having Airbnb in the building, so I ended up making all the units in my building Airbnb. And then the second I put it on, the demand was so strong, I ended up making 3 times rent in the first month. And I'm like, okay, like this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. I went into my job, told my manager, like, all right, I'm giving you my month's notice. I want to do the entrepreneurship full time. And just to give you an idea, is when I got into this like bigger pockets, like I wanted to have my like cash flow replace my 9 to 5 income. I thought it would be like a 15-year process, something like that. And then all of a sudden in 3-4 months, I'm like, all right, I'm leaving. I'm gonna do this like full time. So it was like accelerated. It was fast. My job ended up asking me to stay on board for part time, but at the same time, it was good. I get to keep my benefits. And finally, December 25th comes. They're like, okay, we don't need you anymore after Christmas. Jan 1, you'll start. We don't need you at our job anymore. And at the time it was kind of scary, but because I didn't know, but I ended up saying okay. And January 1, 2018 is when I started this business full time.
That's cool. What was that like? I mean, you're working a job, right? And all of a
Yeah.
sudden, now you're not anymore. I mean, what was that like?
So I will tell you that when I told all my friends and family and wife and everybody, like 3-4 months of doing the Airbnb business, that I want to leave, and I'm actually going to put in my notice, everybody that I knew thought I was crazy. They're like, how can you do that? You're making a nice salary income. you got a degree in this, like you have like a family and you have expenses, and you know, entrepreneurship is not easy, it's up and down. But like I had this thing in me where I could not concentrate at work anymore because I did not care. Like even though I liked my job at one point, but like now I see something different and I got excited, and I'm like fantasizing in the meetings at work and daydreaming. And I'm like, okay. And then I started getting anxious being in those meetings and like them talking about things that I now don't care about. So I was like, okay, it's in me. I have to do it. I'll bet on myself. Like I had this like alpha male mentality, like, you know, I'm gonna figure it out. There's nothing that's gonna stop me. And you know, also I have plan B just in case if something goes wrong, you know, I could always just go back and get a job. You know, I'll never make it so I don't have any money in my pocket. You know, I'll do anything. I'll go on and drive for Uber, you know, if that's the case, if I need to provide. So, you know, I kind of went against everybody's like wants for me, and I kind of bet on myself, and you know, I went on in this business. But yeah, it was a little scary, but I was like, you know, let's make it happen.
Did you find that, especially early when you got into the short-term rentals, that the people around you weren't as supportive as you would liked? I mean, I remember when I got started, you know, my family and my friends, they always thought I'm kind of crazy, right?
Yeah,
Raising money and buying real estate. And so
yeah.
was that similar for you as well, or what was that like?
So one thing for me is I might feed off that from other people. When people doubt me, it's like I just want to prove them wrong. So like I kind of like use that as motivation to like, okay, you know, I'm gonna make it happen. So, you know, think bad upon it, think I'm gonna fail and I'm gonna prove you wrong. That's like my mindset, you know. So maybe it's the way I'm able to do things. Like if I had another route where they're like, oh, you got this, you're gonna do it, maybe I would not be end up being where the position I am in today. So I'm kind of I'm okay with how things panned out. But then it's funny, like now when you are who you are and how successful you become, then the conversations start happening. Like I knew this was gonna happen. I knew you were gonna do it. I knew
Sure.
you had it in you from day one. Like it's funny, but like you know, I'll say, okay, thank you. You know, I appreciate it. But doubt me a little bit more because I want to grow bigger. You know?
So you're obviously very self motivated. Did you find that you had to upgrade the people you hung out with, or not really?
So yes and no. Like as I have progressed in my like business and my lifestyle has changed, and my conversations with certain like friends and family has completely changed. Like I'll tell you, like there are friends that don't bring up what's most important to me in my life anymore, which is my business. You know, so you know when you go hang out with them, it's like the same thing that we used to do back in high school and college. Like okay, let's watch the UFC event, well, let's watch the NBA events. Let's watch this thing, and let's go to this restaurant and just talk about sports. And yeah, it's good. You know, there are times where you know you don't want to be all business, 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 but like you know you stop relating to them at some point. Like the conversations they have about, oh, hey, you know, I'm looking forward to Friday. Because I want to go out for the weekend. And then for me, it's like, oh man, Friday comes, that's when like business stops. I can't wait until Monday, you know? So it's like different. And then you know, I'll tell you, like as you make money, like relationships with your family changes too, because you end up becoming like a supporter to your family. So almost all conversations is like, okay, can you help me with this, can you help me with that, where are you at, like I'm having trouble, like and then that's just all it is in those like family meetings. So then you start like pulling away a little bit. So
Yeah.
yeah, you know, sometimes it gets lonely out there, you know. But like one thing that connects me with like my friends is sports. You know, it's like my release. Like I go there, you know, play basketball with them, and it's like fun for me, you know. And then I have also tried looking for that stimulating type friendship groups, you know. I started joining some entrepreneur groups, and like this one thing called Entrepreneur Organization, which has chapters all around the world. And it's like, you know, $10,000, $15,000 buy-in. And then you get to meet with other entrepreneurs that are at a high level that want to pay for the buy-in too. And I thought that was going to be like the best thing on earth for me, because everyone like, you know, lives by saying how it changed their life, how they're so happy, they love their you know, group. But like, hey, I kind of don't relate to them as much as I thought I was gonna, you know. So it's kind of a weird position that I'm in. You know, I get real lonely sometimes. It's weird. I get lonely, but at the same time I have friends, I have you know, family and stuff, but like, you know, nobody knows the stuff that you're going through in your business. Nobody relates to it. It's hard to, and that's your life, right? So it's like it's hard to have conversations when people see, okay, hey, I have a big business, I have all these employees, I have nice cars, I have nice things, but like, I'm stressing, I'm nervous, like my slow season's here, I have cash flow problems. And it's like, then I have somebody coming and asking, hey, can you give me a loan of this much? And it's like, whoa, it's like, hey, I'm gonna be negative in my cash flow. How can I give you a loan? Then you start looking at you in some type of way, like, oh, come on, you're making all this money. How can you say that? So it's been weird from a relationship standpoint. Um, but like I've got to meet some cool people. I'm into exotic cars, so like when I go to like the valet of the nice restaurants, you start talking to the people over there. You kind of hear them out, and like it's cool to be seen, and
What do you
hang out
drive?
with. So I have a few ones. I have a Lamborghini Huracan Evo. I have like a Rolls Royce Wraith. I have an NSX and like a G wagon. So
Yeah, that's
yeah,
funny. I got into exotic car hacking myself also.
perfect.
Yeah.
You're my friend. Maybe I know you in the group then.
Oh, are you in the extra group?
Yeah.
That's awesome, man. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I just picked up a Wraith. We just actually had PJ on the podcast.
Oh,
Uh
no way. You got PG
yeah,
on the podcast. That's
yeah,
pretty
him on
cool.
the podcast recently.
Yeah.
But anyways, and I'm in EO too. That's pretty funny.
Yeah. So
Um,
I'm a student of PJ. I've been through a lot of cars. I benefited during COVID, especially in the COVID. That's when I kind of started
mhm.
buying the cars, and it doesn't matter what I bought. I made money on it. Like I bought
Yeah,
it 6 months later. I made 10,000, 15, 20, 30. I had a Ferrari 458 that made me like 40,000 in like a couple of months.
yeah.
McLaren five.
And
Yeah.
guys, for those of you listening, what he's talking about is you can buy a car essentially for if it's got the right spec, the right year, the right mileage, and you don't lose money on it, and you may even make money on it
Right.
depending on where it's at in the market cycle. So there's one specific guy that we had on the podcast before named PJ that teaches this. Um, that's pretty cool, man. Yeah,
Yeah.
and then there's a community of people around that, but it's a fun thing.
Yeah.
I want to I
How's
want
your
to circle.
experience for EO been? Like, it's been good and bad for me. Like, I'm curious to know from a different perspective.
EO has been great.
Okay,
So
good.
everybody, and like you, I moved into, well, I had to kind of upgrade my friend group, and I moved to a city where I didn't have a ton of friends. I moved from Chicago to Scottsdale,
Yeah.
and I was like, that's one thing that's missing for me, because like you mentioned before, it can be lonely as an entrepreneur. There's not a lot. Not everybody relates to what you're going through, especially with as many employees as you have, and us too. There's a lot of issues that come up, and you want to have people that you can talk to about it. And so for me, joining an entrepreneur group like EO in my local market where I have friends, we have
Yeah.
chats, text chats and things like that has helped me a lot as an entrepreneur. Obviously having great partners like Michael and Drew is helpful as well, but having that kind of outside perspective in an organization like that, I think a lot of it comes down to how your form is built, but it's a
Right.
great thing in general. So it's cool that you're a part of that. And then you meet people from other markets. You could go to other countries and meet people that are all in the same group. It's kind of like a little fraternity for entrepreneurs. So
It is.
pretty
Yes.
cool. Uh, I wanted to circle back a little bit on your short-term business.
Sure.
So what did you experience? So I'm assuming do you actually own the real estate, or do you rent, do you lease it from someone else and then do a short term? How
Yes.
are you set up?
The second you said the second one you said. So I am in the rental arbitrage business.
Yep.
So even though my first way to get in was to purchase, and that's kind of how I got into it. And
Mm-hmm.
since then, I've bought and I purchased like multifamily properties. I wish I purchased more than I have done so far, but I get distracted with the cars, and I get distracted with cash flow problems that I go through on an annual basis. But yes, I also own, but that's maybe like 2% of my portfolio of 300 units.
Mm-hmm.
My business is rental arbitrage. So I kind of go to the big landlords in my markets, and they have to be motivated, and they have to need me to come into their unit to pay market rent, because for whatever reason they're not getting it rented, or they have just so much vacancy in their buildings where they can use the cash flow for what I bring in. So I tell them, like, allow me to rent your unit at market rent. hopefully give me a month free or two upfront, depending on the time of the year, which helps me with my startup costs. And I pay them rent and I furnish it, and then I put it on Airbnb and I make the difference.
Are
Yeah.
And
these
that's
in
kinda
an
how,
apartment? Are these in apartment buildings? Because you said units. Are these apartment buildings, or are they single family houses, or a little bit of
yeah.
both?
So no, my portfolio is based in apartment buildings all over, like urban markets. That's kind of where my business
So
is.
you'll find someone like us, like
Right.
that own an apartment complex, like, hey, I got this set up. I got this program, and I will put Airbnb residents on your property.
Right.
And uh sometimes they're interested and sometimes they're not, right?
Yeah,
But you
99.9% of the time is they're not interested. You know, nobody wants this in in their building. It affects the community within the building, but I hustled and put myself in situations to find that 0.1% of landlords that said yes to me. And not only that is, they give me 1 or 2 units at first, and then I proved to them like, hey, I can handle 4 units, 10 units, 15, 20, 30, 100, 150. Like I scaled
ah
within my landlords over the years, and
so you kind
it's
of tiptoe in
right,
and show them that it works.
right,
They're happy with it, and then you kind of scale it within that community.
exactly. So like just to continue on to my story, initially back in 2018, I first tried the property management model, which was like an 80-20 split within with like an owner who had a furnished place already, whatever it was. And then I realized that was not for me. It was not something that I liked doing. It almost made me an assistant to individuals. And I actually got into a bad transaction where somebody, made me onboard their units for like 3-4 months. And after 1 month of managing it, they like cut me off. So like put a real bad taste in my mouth. So fortunately, I was put in a situation where there was this one group of like there's one landlord who had maybe 1,000 units at the time, and 100 units that were vacant. So I started pitching to them, like calling them like every other week to see if they were interested. And they were like, just call back in 2 weeks, call back in 3 weeks. And then finally they're like, we're not interested. And I was like, well, how about at least one or two of the units? And how about I just pay you rent and furnish it and, run it myself? And the owner of the management company was said, okay, if you don't cause me any problems, like, yeah, you could take these 2 units. And then eventually I went exactly what I said earlier. I went back and I'm like, can I have 2 more? Can I have 4 more? And all of a sudden I have 35 units with him. And that's when the rental arbitrage model was like fell in my lap. And this was even before the term rental arbitrage was there. It was back in 2018. And that's kind of how I started my rental arbitrage business. And I realized that's the model for me because it was not hand holding. It was just like I ran my business and I, paid him the rent. He handled the maintenance issues of the building, and I'm just like a normal tenant. But this guy had, hundreds of units that were vacant at any given time.
So the risk that we see as apartment owners, obviously, is that with that model, it does, like you said, it screws up the culture on site
Yep.
potentially.
Yep.
How do you mitigate that to give, because you can't really control these people that are coming in, right?
Right. Right.
It's just whoever's going to be there. But I'm
Right.
sure you have some kind of something that you've set up to make that a little bit less risky for the owner
Yeah.
potentially.
So for one, it depends on the like unit type too. Like I'm not going in A+ buildings in downtown Chicago or downtown like in any market, and where the rent's like 4 or 5 thousand, and the person next to me is a lawyer, and the person above me is a doctor. Like these are like B-, maybe C+ type units where they're 50 unit buildings, and there's a little riffraff in the buildings in itself, both with the long-term tenants. It's not like they're like super easygoing. I sometimes I smell weed in the hallways. So that's kind of where I found my niche. My rent is like 1,800, 2,000, 2 bedroom, 1 bath, in a 50 unit building.
Now,
And yeah, go ahead.
what's the demand for something like that? I mean, normally I was associate Airbnbs with, kind of vacation properties and maybe something a little
Right.
nicer. And so, what kind of clientele then does that attract? I mean, who
Yeah.
wants to rent, this for a weekend or a week at a time?
So yes, you're right. Like you think of vacation rental markets, which is true, but urban is becoming big in short-term rentals. And one, there's a lot of regulations against in urban markets to not do Airbnb. So the supply is always low in different markets. So with that being said, it's like, hotels are expensive. People are trying to find an alternative type place. And I'm offering 2 bedrooms and a bath, or 2 bedrooms, 2 baths, and my product type is what they're looking for. At the same time, there's not a lot of hotels around my area. All the hotels that are my area are in downtown, and not everybody needs to go to downtown every time they come to Chicago. So I'm bringing a product mix that is not available in the market. And at the end of the day, the demand doesn't lie. I didn't know that there's certain neighborhoods that I was putting units in and they were successful. It was almost that same multiplier. I would be in an amazing neighborhood versus a bad neighborhood. One neighborhood would be 3 times or $3,000 rent, and another neighborhood would be $1,000 rent, but I'll still make 2 to 3 times rent on whatever unit it was. So I didn't know that it was going to be like this until I actually started doing it, and then at the end of the day, like I said, the market doesn't lie, the demand doesn't lie.
Now, how did you? So you started with 2 units in this one apartment owner. You're now at 35. Why did the owner kind of start giving you more units? So obviously,
Yeah.
it wasn't as bad as they thought, but they thought something and it was something else. Why did that? You think? Why did that happen?
So like this landlord is scaling himself, he's in like that market of like, 1,000 units, and he's buying, 200 unit portfolios at a time. And his model is like the buy, rehab, refinance, and repeat model, right? The burn method. But like this is not like the little small fix and flips. This is like mass size rehabs, right? Like he's adding value of like $1 million, $2 million to each building, right? And he, as every tenant leaves the unit, he just turns it around. So different times of the year is different motivations for landlords, right? He might finish a building in December, and all of a sudden, you're not going to get it rented out for another 4 or 5 months. So, hey, I'll take the cash flow for this. I'll cover some rent for this debt. Like I'll get some rent for this debt service. So, like I said, at any given time, he had like, 100 to 200 units vacant. So, landlords like you guys, they want to keep a vacancy, a percentage there, right? Because if you're 100% occupied, that means that you're pricing it way too low. So they try to hit this like 95, 96% occupancy, and then they'll take some here and there for me. I wasn't causing problems. Like you asked, like, how do I make sure like people are not doing bad things? It's, I'm doing a good job screening. I go through having conversations with each guest. I'm asking them the reason for their stay, who they're coming with. I ask them for the first and last names. I ended up looking up them on social media, finding their LinkedIn. I go through a process, and then inside the unit, I have like noise monitoring. I have people on staff that will go to the unit if there's a problem or if people are being loud and kick people out. And also I make relationships with the neighbors. Like if there is a problem and they complain, I see their email, and then I give them $100 gift card. I'm sorry for the inconvenience. If something like this happens again, just call us next time. Don't call the landlord. We'll handle it, and we'll give you a gift card, and they kind of like that sometimes.
Yeah.
So as long as the landlord is not getting complaints and having problems, they're okay with me.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier you sometimes go through cash flow problems. What's happening in your business? I'm just curious.
So I'll talk about a situation that I just got into in 2022 to 2023. So in 2022, like I know I'm fast forwarding, but like 2022, I had from like 40 units when I told you the story back in 2018, and now 2022 comes. I've gone through the whole COVID thing. If you want to talk about COVID, we could talk about that at a later point. But now I have 300 units, and I'm scaling throughout the year for one. So that's one thing. So I'm using a lot of my funds, my reserves that I have, into growing the business. So one, that lures my cash. Secondly, is I go into slow seasons. In my market, summertime is where I make my money. I make my money in 3-4 months out of the year. And then in the wintertime, it's significantly bad. Like and at the same time, if you're adding units during like the tail end of the year, then you eat into more of your like cash flow in the slow season. So in 2022, I had pent up demand. I was making money that I never made before. Mass mandates went away, and there was pent up demand in my market. I had the most units that I ever had, and I made the most money I ever had made in those few months in the summer. But all of a sudden, there was fatigue of traveling to my market, and because of that, my winter ended up being way worse than I was expecting. I started taking losses in November of $350,000 a month of losses. Like basically, my revenue came in at like 600,000, and I had like $1 million worth of expense because my rent was 600,000 plus all my people and everything to run the business, utilities, whatever it was, and then growth in my business too at the same time because I didn't know this was going to happen. Um, so I took a $350,000 loss in November, $350,000 loss in December, January, $400,000 loss. February, 350. Like all of a sudden, I had $1.5 million worth of losses in 4 months. I had $1.2 million in cash reserves from like my proceeds from like the summer months, and all of a sudden, I'm negative $300,000 in my bank account. It's a struggle. It's like depressing. You see, you're slowly bleeding. Your money out every single month, and it's the risk you took. I did not expect that winter to be that bad. I was adding units nonstop. I started hiring a huge organization, my dream organization, because I thought I was going to get to 400 units and $17 million worth of revenue. And the pent up demands, the new demand going forward. And it was not the case. So all of a sudden I'm delaying rent 5 days, just to meet that like late fee cutoff. I took my utilities off of auto pay. I'm stacking up debt on my credit cards all over again. And just like I need to get to spring, I need to get to summer, and I got there, and then now I'm a little more prepared now. Going to this year, I'm not gonna. I actually took a layoff. I took maybe 20 resources out of my business because remember I told you I thought I was gonna get to 400 units and I thought I was gonna make 17 million. I'm flat year over year from a revenue perspective. I made in 2022 $10.7 million, and in 2023 I'm going to make 11.5 million. So I'm kind of flat year over year, but my organization was as if it was going to go to 17 million, so I had to adjust. So that's kind of why I go through cash flow problems, because of seasonality and managing my growth, and not forecasting my slow season like I thought it was going to be. But I have a little more data now, so I'm prepared a little bit more this year.
What do you think the biggest threat is to your business? Because you hear a bunch of stuff about short-term rentals, and then you read stuff about New York basically outlawing,
Yep.
and you're like, oh my gosh, you're killing me. So what do you assess your biggest threats?
So again, like you said, New York regulations is huge. Like you want to be in a market that already has regulations in place. And so at least you could live within the regulations, and they might not have a new regulations coming up in X amount of years. New York and like LA and like Seattle, like those are markets that like have like strong regulations to like not do short-term rentals. Obviously, it's if you could figure out how to do it with those in those markets in some type of hotel license or whatever, that's great. So regulations is a big thing. But I actually like going into markets that are regulated because of like supply issues. Like you'll hear about the Scottsdale market and the Arizona market, how it had the Airbnb bust, right? How back during COVID, everybody wanted to come to Arizona and Texas and Dallas, Austin, and Florida because those were the only places things were open. And then the demand was so high, and everyone's adding short-term rentals. But now when COVID's over, like people are going back to like the traditional other vacations that they were doing, but all of a sudden the supply that they thought that it needed is not there anymore, and demand's not there. So all of a sudden everyone's saying Airbnb bust, it's a terrible business, it's not good. But yeah, you kind of went where you saw everybody else going, and you kind of screwed yourself over. So yeah, so regulation is something important for me. It's like cash flow problems. Like don't do something wrong to make it so I can't get out of my slow season, which I always think that I'm prepared to, but there's always something that happens that did not expect. Like I did not expect COVID to happen on March 15th, the day spring break happens. And I was like at crazy losses at the same time that year, and I'm like, okay, my business is done. At that time. And then I thought, okay, now I know COVID. I'm not going to let something like that happen again. And I let that happen again in 2022 to 23. So it's like I think I'm smarter, but then I never end up getting it right. I try to base my forecast on my historicals, but my my historicals never matched the future, what happens. So cash flow is big. Another thing is like relationships with landlords, is huge. I work with big property managers and things happen, right? So, I have touched 600 units in my career. I have furnished 600 units. And right now I had 315 like 3 months ago. And then I had 250. And now I just closed a deal for 20 more. And now I'm back at 300, so it's like this up and down thing. And things have happened with my relationship with landlords. So that landlord that I had 35 units with, I'm not doing business with him anymore. Another landlord that I had 55 units with, I'm not doing business with anymore, because something happened. There was a fire in his A-class building in one of the wings, and it displaced 100 tenants. And then now my wing that had no fire ended up being valuable to the landlord. And then all of a sudden he's like, I need to move these people in tomorrow. And I'm like, listen, we're month to month at the time, and I knew he was gonna let me go anyway. I was like, but I'm gonna make $100,000 net income here. I'm not letting give you my units. Are you crazy? And then he went off saying like, uh, sue me. I'm locking your doors and moving your stuff. I don't give a crap. Let the judge see that there was like these families displaced, and who gives a shit about your business? But then it was like, I'm a businessman, so I'm like, okay, then what's your offer for me to leave? And then he gave me an offer, $60,000, is what I took away, which wasn't a win, but to me, it wasn't the worst loss. He took my 3-year-old furniture. I didn't have to deal with anything where, oh, you broke this vanity, you dinged this wall after, like you owe me this and like that, because that happens when I leave units too. And oh, you owe me for this utility fee from like 2 years ago, you owe me this late, like this, that happens every time I leave, right? So I didn't have to deal with any of that. And that landlord actually gave me a break during COVID. He subsidized my rent to allow me to stay in business, so it's kind of giving him a favor back. And now from with like 55 units, now I have 1 unit with him, and that's gonna like at some point leave. But it's funny, like even after our ups and downs and our arguments and like lawyer here, lawyer there, he just texted me the other day. He's like, are you interested in these 3 units? So it goes to
There you
show you,
go.
even through like the battles we've had, like COVID, you owe me this, you're causing problems here, I need you out of my investors are pissed off at you, my community, like even through all that, after like 4 years of now we don't do business together, he still messaged me, because I do pay out all my last dollars, and then I take my furniture out with care, and I clean the unit and I give it back to you, even though I have no more business with you. And I understand some things that probably dinged up, but like it was nothing that to the point where he's like, I don't want you back. And then so
Yeah.
it's
Your
interesting. Like,
reputation is
yeah,
important to you,
right.
right? Like in your business in general. And so,
Yeah,
I mean, that's just an example of that. I'm
right.
curious, Syed, what would you say is the hardest thing about doing short-term rentals that someone that's just getting started wouldn't know about in this environment unless they
Yeah.
were kind of at your level?
So a big thing is it's not real estate. People think it's passive and set it and forget it, and then you collect rent every month, and people don't bother you. But it's a lot of hand holding. It's hospitality. It's not real estate. So it's a real business. Which there are real businesses within real estate. But like that long, what was it, buy and hold type business model, it's not that, right? So it's a lot of checking guests in, making sure they have the lockbox code and how to get to their unit, and then they don't know how to use the lockbox, and they don't know how to check in, and they're outside, and you're in the middle of dinner with your family, and they're like, how do I get in? And you start getting stressed, so it's a lot of hand holding. Then you have to make sure the unit is clean. Cleaners come, they don't do a good job, you get complaints, or the cleaner doesn't show up, then what do you do? So it is work. And it is not as easy as people on social media say it is. But if you have the knowledge and experience and know certain tips and tricks, and then think of all the things that can go wrong, will go wrong, and have backups to it, you can make it a model where it's more automated. But again, you got to be there ready to take action.
Do you feel like you can scale this business, Syed?
So I
You
feel like
already
I've
have.
scaled it. Yeah,
Yeah,
I've
no,
scaled. I
scale it
definitely, yeah.
more. Scale it more.
So yes and no. So I would say 300 units with no outside partners, no debt, is a pretty scaled business. You know, I have $10 million worth of revenue. I fluctuate between 10% to 15 to 20% margins. So I am taking home a good amount of money. I have 75 resources in my business, so it's scaled. I had dreams of taking it to 500 units, $20 million of revenue, you know, take home like, you know, $2 million or 2.4, whatever it is. And but because of the things I have gone through, the ups and downs, 40 units going away tomorrow, COVID happening, cash flow issues, lawsuit from my truck driver, lawsuit from the guest, lawsuits coming out of nowhere. Like, it's just like the stress has taken a toll on me recently. And I'm like, listen, like, okay, I kind of just want to stay at this 300 unit mark. And I kind of want to just make $1 million a year and just leave me alone. Like, I'm hiding, you know, like I like sometimes I hide, and there are times where I'm like, man, just looking at my phone. I don't want any phone call of something bad happening. So, you know, I'll tell you, like, I've gone through some bad stress with this, even though like my daily life is like, anybody would say it's a dream life, right? Like, you know, I have that 2 hour work week. You know, I don't know if you guys, Gary, if you know, like EOS, you know, it's big in EO, like everyone does EOS, and that like kind of changed my life, right? So my work is really that L10 meeting every week. But don't get me wrong, that takes a toll on me, that because all the questions and everything and the path and what we're doing happens right then and there, and I'm firing out answers, right? So like I'm exhausted for like a day after, you know, because my brain. But like other than that, it's like I'm managing stress, you know, and people will say it's a dream lifestyle, a dream everything, but man, it takes a toll on you. Sometimes I go through body pains when something really bad happens, you know, and so that's like, okay, so just give me my million and leave me alone. That's kind of where I'm at, you know.
Dude, I've never related to anything more than what you just said.
Right, yeah. Right.
That's so cool. Yeah, listen, man. Same thing here. Like I I found that I've had to focus a lot on my health, like on the weekends, especially. I'm just doing I'm like, what can I do to stack up like wins in my health, whether it's going to do the cold plunge and sauna or just other things to kind of
Right.
help me manage the stress better. And there's ways that entrepreneurs find ways to do that, and in order, because it's just so hard
Right.
that you can't even, you just rattled off a bunch of stuff. There's probably 50 other things deeper than that are happening also.
Right.
And that's just what it is. It's the reality of it. So, Syed, this has been really great. How can people get a hold of you if they need to?
Yeah, so I just started my personal brand, and that's kind of why I'm on this like podcast tour, and I'm getting people to know who I am and what I've done. I've kind of been under the scene, behind the scenes, like for the past like 6 years, just working on my business, growing it. But again, because of the cash flow problems, I was like, okay, I need to have some type of thing just in case something happens. So I started creating a personal brand and posting on social media. So find me on Instagram. You can see my Instagram handle on my Zoom. It's Syed B&B, SYED B&B. And over there, you can see like my story and things that I go through on a daily basis, and some of my snippets from podcasts. So you kind of learn who I am.
Hey,
Awesome.
thanks for sharing this business, man. It's been really interesting. Also, thanks for being vulnerable, and because we always talk about, oh, how great we are, but you really talked about some ups and downs. So thank you so much for doing that and for being here on the show today.
Yeah, it was a good time. It went by so fast. Maybe we have like a number 2 at some point.